All right, guys. So today is we're in week 5, day 3. So Wednesday, March 3rd. So yeah, today we're going to cover a few things. It's going to be maybe a fair amount of information thrown your way. We have to talk about asynchronous JavaScript and kind of how we interact with web-based stuff. So using HTTP, using a method called fetch in JavaScript. So we'll go over all this today. Let's actually back up and go to yesterday. So yesterday, we talked a little bit more about CSS positioning. So again, Flexbox and grid layout. These are definitely more advanced CSS topics, but can definitely be really handy when you're developing web pages to kind of understand and know about. So one page that I linked to my discussion group, easy Googling. So a lot of you guys might have came across it, but if I just search for Flexbox and CSS, it should be the first result. Yep, so this a complete guide to Flexbox, like this has taught me a lot. Just again, I'm a visual person, so they have great examples. They use like nice images. They can talk about like parent containers and then child items and kind of have all of these properties like flex direction or flex shrink. Again, there's more than I even know on this page, but it's just a great visual example of Flexbox. So definitely recommend this if you're still trying to understand Flexbox and kind of know how it works and or what you can do with it. So there's a lot here. Great page. So that's it's css-tricks.com. But again, simple Google search for Flexbox should be the first result for you, and it's a good read, especially if you're trying to master Flexbox. All right, and then yeah, we talked about kind of using JavaScript within your HTML, CSS pages. So let's actually look at that. So yeah, we had LinkedIn.js. So this was just adding. I'm kind of getting familiar with using JavaScript with HTML. So that's using get element by ID or query selector. So we just kind of wanted to mess around with that. Again, it was kind of an open-ended challenge, more just, hey, try to use this in your code however you want to. Just make sure you understand how to do that. And then there's browser storage. So this is the idea of persisting some information between, sessions. So like when you go to a web page, it might store some information. So the next time you come there, it's still kind of available to you. So let's actually go to browser storage. This was probably not too long of a challenge, so we're just going to try to do that quickly. So I got a 4. All right.
Ankur?
All right. I always got to delete my repositories here. Sorry, I should have done this earlier. I didn't realize.
It's almost 10 o'clock, Jeff. I want to hear that computer.
All right, clean that. And that password. All right, cool. Should be deleted, hopefully. Now I should be able to fork. So let's go back to browser storage. Fork. Get there. Forking. I'm going to grab my URL, go to my terminal here, and get to my right directory. So I have a challenge directory, and do git clone, paste the URL, it's magic, and get there, and opening up. All right, let me move this to a new screen, and let's get going. Okay, so browser storage. Again, the task here was just to get familiar with using your browser storage mechanism. So in this case, we want to have a page that basically allows you to enter your name. And then if you enter your name, we should remember that name in browser storage so that if you visit that page again, we should get the name and be able to say hi to you directly as opposed to asking for your name each time. All right, so just general pseudocode that they kind of put up for us is, if the name exists in local storage, just show the name on the page. However, if the name does not exist in local storage, then ask for the name and then, say hello to that person. All right, so that's our task here. Again, nothing too crazy going on here, but let's actually write some code. So don't need the README, but I have an index.html. Again, I'm going to use my snippet. So I have the snippet that I created, just creates a base HTML for me, but I always need to fix this part. All right, so we have our HTML template here. We have a head section. The head section includes a style sheet and JavaScript. So in this case, my JavaScript is called script.js. So I need to make sure that name matches. Again, the async defer is used so that the JavaScript will be loaded after everything in your HTML page loads so that your JavaScript can have access to all the elements. So that's what the async defer will do. And then also, if you have a style sheet, you can link it up here. In this case, I don't think I have a style sheet, so let me just comment that out. All right, so then let's actually look at the README and see what we got to do. All right, so we want to say hello to the user, and then if they don't have the username, ask for the name. So let's actually try to code up some stuff. So, all right, so in my main section, let me just delete some extra code. I'm just going to have something that can say hello to my user. So I'm going to have a div. I always put divs in just to have groupings. In this div, it's going to be a heading, and it's going to say hello, and then user name. All right, pretty simple web page so far. And then if they don't have a name entered, I want to give them an option to enter a name. So in this case, I'm going to say, let's give a paragraph and say, please enter your name. Again, we're just creating an HTML page, no logic here. It's not going to do anything, anything with our JavaScript at this point. And then we need an input field. So if you guys are familiar with input, this would be type equals text. And placeholder I could use. Yeah, that. So this is just like the initial value shown. Self-closing, and then we're gonna need a button. So let's do a button, type button, and the value for this will be enter name. All right, so let's actually take a look at what we have, just to get familiar with. All right, not sure what the issue is, but we'll find out later.
I don't think a button is self-closing. I think you have to put a closing tag on it.
Gotcha, thanks. Yes, you're right. Sorry, I'm trying to use input. Thanks for the assist there. So that'll be here. I think that's what I want. Thanks again. And that's not a button. All right, I'm gonna save that. Hopefully my page looks correct. If not, I'm gonna come back and re-edit it. I'll launch it here. All right, here's my page. Let me make that bigger so you guys can see it. All right, so we have a hello username. Again, that's my heading that I added. So it's H1 element. And then below I have a section that says, please enter your name. And then you can enter your name here. So, you know, if my name was Roger, I can enter Roger, and then click enter name. However, again, we don't have any functionality implemented here. So enter name is not actually going to do anything. Roger just is a text field value that we entered. But otherwise, there's no functionality here. But we just have our variable and structure. So again, that's what HTML is for. It's creating that structure for whatever we're want to display on our web page. So I think, you know, step one, I've created what I want to see visually. Step two will now be to do what I want to do logically. All right, so let's actually go to our JavaScript. So script.js, so let's actually write some logic here. All right, so one method, again, I don't know if you guys came across it or was talked about earlier, is there's an onload method for the window. So your window is your main object in your browser. So that has an onload method that we're gonna add some functionality to. So in this case, window, the onload will be automatically triggered as one of your first things when your page actually loads. So in this case, I want to get an object. So let's say my name button, call it btn. In this case, I want to extract my button here so that when it's clicked, I can actually do something with it. So I think, I forget which student was talking about it yesterday, but there might be a couple ways to do this. You could add the event listener or the caller to your HTML, or you could have your JavaScript kind of add that event listener. So I'm actually going to add it in my JavaScript. In this case, I need to give my button an ID. The reason being so that I could actually access it. Otherwise, all these elements are kind of nameless. So there's no way for my JavaScript to know, that this button element is the one I want. Like I could maybe parse the DOM and go like, go through each element, and when I find a button, say, okay, that's the button I wanted, but that's not really efficient. So in this case, it's just easier to give an ID here. So I'll give an ID of submit name. All right, so I have that. So now I could use one of our JavaScript methods to get that element. So in this case, I'm going to do document and do query selector. Query selector, there we are. And then I want to target this ID. So if you guys remember how to target IDs, the way we do it in CSS, it's what we got to do for query selector. We use a hashtag. In this case, hashtag, and then the name of my button. All right, so if done correctly, this name button should give me access to the element. And then I want to check to make sure I actually got something. So I'm going to do an if statement, see if that's valid. And then if that is valid, I'll add an event listener to that button. All right, so event listener, again, this is just something that's kind of going to hook an action from your web page to a method within your JavaScript so that you can kind of do some logic after that. So this is going to be a click event, and then I'm going to have a handler. So let's give my handler name. Let's actually create my handler. Call it on click submit name. And that's going to be that arrow function. So again, hopefully you guys are familiar with that arrow syntax. You're going to see this repeatedly. So hopefully it doesn't scare you when you see, parentheses and an arrow kind of feeding something in. All right, so let me just, I kind of want to just test this incrementally. So I'm going to add an alert and say you clicked a button. And all right, so I added my event listener. So this is going to be passed over here. All right, so basically I added an event listener to the button element so that when it's clicked, it'll trigger this function, and that function will do whatever I want it to. So in this case, it's going to pop up an alert. So let's actually see this in action and see if it's working or not. So let's go back to, just go back to my web page. All right, so you have my web page. Let's see what happens. Nothing. Do I refresh? Or nothing's happening. All right.
Don't you need to put parentheses on the add event listener function name?
You mean right here?
Yeah.
So good thinking, but no. So if you add it here, it's actually going to call the function right here. So I want to just pass it the handler, but not actually invoke the handler. So the parentheses would actually make alert that button trigger.
So is this where you'd need to use a prevent default? So because it's just reloading, it's defaulting to reloading the page every time. So your function isn't popping up.
No, he's not using a form though.
Right. Yeah. So forms. Yeah, you're right. So if this were nested in a form, then the page would be refreshing. But yeah, I gotta debug here. So
it's because you have submit name, and then in the other one you have submit button.
Thank you. You are right. Gotta get my naming down. Thank you for that assist. That would take me hours potentially. All right, so that's submit name. So yeah, good lesson there. Make sure you are using the correct ID when you're tracking your item. So hopefully that should clear it up. Let me refresh though. All right, let's take a look at what I need to do here. Calendar away. Let's get alerts, JavaScript. Alert, yeah, that looks right. Alert. All right, so submit name. Let's actually see if we get into here. delete my VS Code. All right, let me try launching this again and see. All right, we have our page. Let's enter a name. Welcome. All right, let me try it this way.
I think type has to be submit for button.
Type here, submit.
Yeah, so the way you had it before, we had a button.
Gotcha. Yeah, I might have been trying to combine types. So I'm going to use the input field, which is going to be a type button. So let's see if this changes it. Refresh. All right. Still nothing. All right. So,
So I'm following along and it works on my end. I'm using live server.
okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Definitely had this working before. All right, let's actually try some other way. So we could try get element by ID. This shouldn't make a difference, but for some reason it might. All right. Oh, sorry. I think I know what the issue is. Maybe.
Do you have to specify where the alert is going?
I don't think so. The alert should use a window because the window is a parent object.
Okay.
Let's see if this is actually getting into here. Test. Refresh. No, that's not even alerting. So let's see. Index.html, script.js. Maybe it's this slash there.
I think you have to exit your browser and then open up the index.html again.
Gotcha. Give that a try. I think it might have been that slash. So I think I was looking for my script file in the wrong place. There we go. Okay. Sorry. So I had my template. All right. And if I do Roger. All right, cool. Sorry, apologies about that. So basically I had a slash here for my script, which was looking in a nested folder, I assume. That was my bad. So yeah, snippets can be bad if you don't know what they're doing. So lesson learned there. All right, so I have my script.js back on track here. Get rid of these alerts. Again, so we use get element by ID, but just to see query selector working. So we saw get element by ID working, but in this case, query selector can also target an ID, but you gotta have that hash mark there. And assuming I don't break anything, this should work as before. So refresh, submit. Yep, you click the button, so it still works. All right, so we're good there. Let's actually proceed. So now that we actually get into our event handler, we actually want to do something once we click the button. So in this case, we want to use our name edit. So in this case, let's give our input for our name value also. So this will be, let's say, name edit. Save that. So now that we have an ID there, excuse me, we can extract that. So let's go let name edit equal, and just to change it up, I'm going to use get element by ID. Usually you want to be consistent, but kind of just use different methods here. So in this case, I don't need the hash mark because I'm using get element by ID. I can just do name edit, and that should get the name edit control. And then if name edit, we want to do something. So all right, so if we want to get the actual value from the control, we can do name edit dot value, and that should be the value we want. And let's just incrementally test. Always good to not get too far ahead. So let's just see if the name pops up.
Do you need to open a block of code after name edit with curly braces?
You mean like this? Yeah, you're right. That's good practice. So the one thing is, if you have a if statement without multiple lines, so since I only have one line, those curly braces are actually optional. However, I will agree with you that having those curly braces is good practice, because if I want to add another line here, like, you know, whatever, blah, this is going to protect me, versus if I don't have these curly braces and I have this type like this. Again, this is JavaScript, so it's not tab delineated, meaning I might think that blah is going to be executed within this if statement, but since I don't have those curly braces, blah actually exists outside that if statement. So it's actually like this, even though that I have it formatted like such. So yeah, you definitely want to have good practice of having those curly braces there. So now it's clear to me and clear to JavaScript that blah is part of this if block. So yeah, good comment there. Thanks for checking my curly braces. All right, so let's actually see this. I'm getting tired of swapping so much. Let's put it over here. Refresh, and let's enter a name. So Roger, I don't know why I put the name Roger. All right, so we got Roger in our alert, so we're capturing our name correctly. We can proceed. All right, so we have our name. Let's actually use local storage or browser storage. So this is just something you have access to within your browser window. So you use it by calling local storage, and then you could set item in there. So set item will actually store a value that you want, and you give it a key. So in this case, I'll just give it a generic key of name. Maybe you want to name it more special if you're going to conflict with other stuff in local storage. This would be my name edit.value. All right, I'm going to get rid of my alert. Don't want a bunch of alerts popping up. All right, so it's going to store a name in my local storage, and then I want to probably update my welcome message. So I'm going to create a function called update welcome message, maybe. And that's actually going to take in a parameter. So I'm going to pass it a name, and that name should be added to the heading that I have polar username. So in this case, I'm going to need an ID here because I want to update username to be actually something that I care about. So in this case, ID will be, let's say, welcome message. All right, so I have an ID there. And let's go back here. All right, so this update welcome message, its task will be to update the welcome message, as one might predict. So let's get that element. So in this case, it's going to be, let's say, welcome message. And that's going to be document. We'll go back to query selector, just to keep you guys on your toes. Query selector, again, since it's query selector, I'm going to need that hash mark, so an ID. And in this case, it's going to be welcome message. All right, so we have that element. Let me get rid of my terminal. Curly braces. And now we have a block of code inside our if statement. We want to do some stuff. So welcome element, I think it's inner HTML, should update what's inside of it. In this case, we want to say hello plus the name that's passed in. All right, get my semicolons, they're optional. All right, so in this case, we're going to call this function once our user clicks the button. So in this case, I'm going to call update welcome message and pass the name. Value. So in this case, I'm using the same value twice. I don't have to, but I'm actually going to store it as a variable just to make it a little easier for me to understand. All right, so I'm going to store it as a local variable. Then I'm going to set that in local storage, and then finally update this. All right, so again, when they click a button, we extract the name from the name edit. We take the actual value from the name edit, and then we add that to local storage. And then we also want to update the heading that welcomes the user. So that calls this function, which extracts the welcome elements, and then updates the welcome elements inner HTML. All right, so that's the Inner HTML is the stuff that's in between the tags, so the content of this element. And if done correctly, this should say hello, Roger, or whatever name you're using. So let's actually save that and test it. So I'm gonna go here, gotcha. Refresh this. All right, let's use our name of Roger. I don't even know Roger in real life, I don't think. But I'm gonna hit submit. All right, great. Notice that the page updated, so now it says hello, Roger. If we add a new name, let's say hello, Chad. Says hello, Chad. All right, so this is working correctly. Let's actually enter my real name. So we have hello, Ankur. But what happens if I refresh this page? So let's refresh it. Okay, so I refreshed it and it's back to hello username. So keep in mind that we stored the name value into local storage or into the browser storage, but we're not actually accessing it. So every time we refresh, we're just going back to our default page. We're not actually taking advantage of what we stored. So that's our next step here. Let me make this bigger. All right, so go back to my JavaScript. Again, we're storing it on line 12 here, local storage, that set item. Now we want to actually extract it. So I'm going to actually back up a step and go back to my window on load. Again, window on load is automatically triggered when the window loads. So in this case, I'm actually going to check here if the name exists. And if the name exists, I could automatically show it. If the name doesn't exist, well, then we're going to go through the same motions of entering a name and then updating our page. So in this case, I'm going to check for my name. So this will actually be a new method or a new function. And it's going to be check for name. Good name for that. Fat arrow function syntax. And this, the job of this function is to simply check if the name exists in local storage. If it does, then update our welcome message. So in this case, let name to extract an item. I access the local storage object and then call get item on it. So get item. And then I'm going to use the same key that I used here. So in one case, I have set item with name, and I'm going to extract that value that I set by doing get item. Now, good practice here is when you're using a key in multiple places, you want to save that in one single place. For example, if I update name to be my name, now I'm going to have to update this place. And theoretically, I can have like 40 different places in my JavaScript where I use this key. So it's good to kind of just centralize that. So I'm just going to create a global variable. Let's create here. Let name key equal name. All right, I have that. And now I could use this for my key. All right, so it's good practice again. Rather than kind of hard coding in multiple places, have a central place where if I want to update that key, I could do that in one place and my code would work fine, as opposed to having to replace every instance of that usage. All right, so I have my name key. I get my item, which should be my name value that I stored. And then I want to call update welcome message with that name. All right, so in this case, if the name exists, it should update the welcome message. But however, I'm not guaranteed that name is going to exist. I should probably add a check here. If name, let's see, if not name, and I'll do return. So basically, this won't do anything if the name is invalid. I'm actually not sure what's going to be passed here, so I might do or and say or name is empty string. So basically, if the name doesn't exist or the name is empty, I just want to return and not do anything with this function. Otherwise, continue on. So let's add some comments for sanity. If name is invalid, don't update. Okay, cool. So I think that should work, but always good to verify. So let me go back to my browser, refresh this. All right, so notice that my name didn't update. So maybe something's not working correctly. But let's actually enter a name and see what happens. All right, that works correctly. What if I refresh? All right, it goes back to username. So it looks like I did something incorrect. I didn't call my function here, which makes sense. So in my window that unload, I'm going to call check for name as my very first thing. All right, I still want to add my event listener, so that's going to happen in all cases. In this case, I'm going to check for name, and then if name exists, it's going to update my welcome message. So with that change, hopefully if I refresh, it's say hello Roger, since that was the last name I entered. And there we go. It says hello Roger. All right, but I can still add my name, submit it. Now it's hello Ankur. If I refresh, it should still be hello Ankur. All right, so I think one additional thing we want to do is we don't want to keep asking for their name if we have their name already. We only want to prompt for their name if their name has not been entered in here. So to do that, we're going to have to add some more logic to our JavaScript. Let's go back to our JavaScript file. All right, so basically if name exists, we update our welcome message. But in that case also, we want to hide this entire block. So this block here, this div, we want to basically remove it or hide it in the case that we have a valid name. So in this case, I'm going to give this div an ID. We'll say this is enter name section. I'm going to name this a little better. So I'm just call it section name. All right, so now I can have access to this entire div and its child elements. Let's access that here. Let's think about this. Anytime the name is appended with a valid name, I want that section to be hidden. So I'm actually going to add that to my update welcome message. Maybe I might change this design a little later, but let's just try this here. Actually, I'd rather have a separate function, good practice. So let's add a new function, const hide main section. This will take in no parameters. That's why I have empty parentheses here. In this case, I want to simply get my name group or name section dot element. That's what I want. Let's use get element by ID again. All right, in this case, since it's element by ID, I don't need that hash mark. So in this case, it's going to be section name. I think usually we use dashes and underscores.
IO.
Thank you. Just going to update my names there. So I've been using underscores. I think typical practice is to use dashes. Just want to make sure I'm consistent there. So let's change these to dashes. Dash for you, dash for you, dash for you, and a dash for you. All right, so they all use dashes now. All right, so section name, I believe that's what I named it. Yep, section name is my div. In this case, I kind of want to just hide it. So how do I actually go about hiding what I want here?
You can replace the inner HTML with nothing.
Yep, that's definitely one way. So I like that suggestion, so I'll go with it. So let's do if section name. Always good to make sure you have your objects. So that's why I'm doing all these if statements. So ifs section name, do some stuff. In this case, let's do section name that inner HTML equals empty. Will that do it? Let's have a look. All right, so basically hide, we'll call hide name section. Let's name that. All right, cool. So I'm going to call that at the end of my update welcome message to actually hide that section. So ideally, if this works correctly, my div, which contains my input for name and my button, should go away. So let's test this. No guarantees it works. Don't want to save it. All right, let me refresh. Okay, my name's there, and look, that section kind of disappeared. Right, but let's say I actually want to test this. So like I actually don't want my name stored there. I want to delete items from my browser storage. So I think I could access that. I could do Control Option or Command Option I. Gives me access to some developer tools. Okay, that at the bottom. So if I want to inspect local storage, I type in local storage. All right, so when you, again, I went to my developer tools, which in Chrome, it's Option, Command, and I. And that gives me access to this panel. And then in this panel, I have some tabs here. So I went to console and just typed in local storage because that's the object that stores all the storage information. So if I actually look at local storage, I can inspect it. So in this case, I have a name, key, and a value of Ankur. So again, remember this is what we added to local storage. I don't know if I can make this bigger, so apologies if it's too small. I can make that bigger. All right. So yeah, I typed in local storage, hit enter, and I got this storage object, and I can kind of inspect it. So in this case, we have name key and my name that I entered, right? So that's actually what we expected. This is what's stored. But you know, what if I wanted to actually delete it? I actually forget how to do it. So let's go to local storage, delete or clear.
You can also inspect the local storage in the Chrome DevTools application tab.
Say that again, application here.
Yeah, you can click there, and then on the left, local storage, you can see that you have the variable stored in the local storage right there.
Gotcha. Oh, that's even better. Okay, cool. Thanks for that tip. I actually didn't know about that. I always use the console. Yeah, so if you go to your application tab, there's a local storage bucket here. And then if you click on file, you can see some values here. So you have a key and value pair. All right, so if we added more items, you'd see more items here. If I want to delete something, I wonder if I could just delete it from here. Delete. Perfect. All right, so I got rid of that. You could also do it from the console. Might just be local storage.clear. There is a way to do it from the console, but since I had the UI tab introduced me, I just use that. All right, so if I actually type local storage here again.
Clear works, but it clears everything.
Gotcha. Yep. All right, cool. So I typed in local storage, and we can inspect this now and notice that my name, the name key and value are erased. So this no longer exists. So if I refresh this, I should expect that it goes back to my default state of hello username. So in this case, I have hello username, and then please enter your name. So back to where we started. Let's add a new name, Roger. All right, so now it says hello Roger. That field, that group disappeared also. So again, that's what we wanted. Maybe we don't want to have username here, so we'll just say hello world. All right, so I think that accomplished everything we needed to. Again, we have local storage working, so Roger stored in local storage. We can use it. If I do local storage clear, all right, so local storage.clear, lowercase c does do it. Forget this exception, that was my bad. So if I refresh now, back to our initial state, hello world, please enter name, and we can enter name. So we could do, Elmo. There we go. All right, so I think that's the basics for the browser storage challenge. I don't know if we had anything else to do, so let's read our page. Nope, we just want to say hello every time. So yeah, there are other ways to kind of go about the things we did. So just one way I wanted to mention. So JavaScript can actually access your CSS style. So I think the first time I did this, instead of doing inner HTML, which totally works, and this is actually easier, you could access the style. And then if you're using like display, like this, you can set that equal to none. So this is actually setting a CSS property as opposed to actually just manipulating the HTML. Again, the HTML way seems easier, but I just want to let you guys know there are other ways to kind of accomplish your task. Sometimes you might have to use CSS because CSS obviously gives you more control of the display. So you could access the style of an element and then access a property. All right, but this works just fine, so I'm not going to break what I have working. But yeah, so again, that's just a quick introduction into browser storage. Again, get familiar with some default methods. Again, you could kind of Google this. I didn't know this magically. Window.onload, and it's just something that executes once your page loads. And that's usually a good place to put like initial things that you want to do. There might be other window methods that get triggered ahead of time that in case you want to do it before page loads, there might be a method for that. Otherwise, yeah, good to break out your logic into functions. And yeah, any questions with browser storage or anything I did, connecting JS to HTML? Any questions out there? Love to answer anything.
I have a question.
Yep.
So if you had to break down this into a few big steps, how would you describe that?
A few big steps. So I'd kind of go back to the times where I went to go test my code. Would be the steps I would kind of do for like pseudocoding if I were writing pseudocode. Where I broke for steps, basically the first thing I did was check if, I guess the very first thing, since it wasn't working correctly, is to make sure my onload was triggering. So just get a mechanism for accessing my JavaScript, make sure that my JavaScript is connected to my HTML. Once I have that, I kind of just checked to see that I can extract my button. And I added like an alert here, I believe, to see that my button actually exists. And then from there, just kind of iteratively add more logic and test it. So you, again, want to constantly be adding a small feature and then testing it. So I wouldn't say there's big steps, it's more incremental. But one is just connect your JS to your HTML file. Two is introduce some base functionality, test it, like test one button. Don't like code everything up and then try to test everything all at once, because that's gonna be harder to debug. Like if something goes wrong, you'd be like, well, is my button not working? Or is my input field not working? Or is my JS logic kind of screwing up somewhere? So again, it's harder to debug when you just go in larger chunks. So I'd say do smaller steps as you're developing anything. And usually it's easier to kind of test and verify that everything's working correctly. All right, cool. Any other thoughts out there? Questions?
I've got it's kind of unrelated, but I'm wondering if you like design or not design a web page, you had an HTML that was like proprietary and you didn't want anybody to get it. Is there any way to like hide it from the Chrome developer tools or?
That's a good question. I'm actually not well versed on that. Someone else might actually know better than me. There are ways to kind of hide your source. So I'm not quite sure how to go about that. But usually, like if the end user has a browser that's actually on your page, they're going to have access to whatever is on that page. But there might be a way to kind of bury HTML. I'm not the best person to ask about that. So sorry if I can't give you a clear answer. I would say I want to guess there should be a way to kind of hide some elements. Like, when you have a CSS file, I don't think they could have access to that CSS file all the time. So
Gotcha.
Typically the HTML is always going to be visible because that's what has to make the page load. What you can do is you can hide all your script information in an encrypted, like binary-ish thing. You can also do server-side rendering to where all of the stuff is built before it's sent to the user. So you get a very vanilla HTML file being pushed to the user. So they don't see all the logic that build it.
Makes sense.
Gotcha. Yep. Thanks for that information. Yeah. Again, I've not really done too much with HTML, like complex HTML stuff, but again, I'm sure there's ways to hide critical information that might be sensitive to your web page or whatever it might be. So definitely worth researching. All right. Thanks for the questions there. Let's take a quick break and then we'll dive into our lecture for today. So let's take an 8-minute break. Let's be back at 10:40 Central Time and we'll get started with our lecture.